For concept 2 notes, we are going to be doing a very, very brief review of some chemistry topics that hopefully you remember from physical science. And we're specifically going to be looking at the topics and the background that is essential for understanding the chemistry of life. Biology is the study of life, but we can't understand biology without also having a chemical understanding. I love this diagram that kind of shows the organization of life on Earth, and I'll kind of explain where we're going to spend most of our time this year. So, first, I can't talk about chemistry without defining matter. Matter is anything that has mass and occupies space, and matter is made of atoms. An atom is the smallest part of an element. So think of all of those things on the periodic table: zinc, iron, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, carbon, all those things. And an atom is the smallest part of that still has the properties of that element. So think of carbon dioxide. That is CO2. It is one atom of the element carbon bonded to two atoms of the element oxygen. And when we think about the elements that are most important for life, and since biology is the study of life, we're really talking about carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And you're going to see these come up. In concept 3, we're going to talk about 4 essential biological molecules or macromolecules, these big molecules that we can't live without. And they are made of these elements. Now, if we have to define matter and atoms when we're talking about chemistry, we have to define cell when we're talking about biology, because a cell is the most basic unit of life. So let's look at this diagram here. If an atom is the simplest form of an element, and we can even break down an atom even further into its subatomic particles, which we will on the next slide, of protons, neutrons, and electrons, those atoms of an element will bind together to become more stable. And when they form bonds, they become compounds. Specifically, compounds that share electrons in a covalent bond are called molecules. We'll be talking in concept 3 about macromolecules, so they would kind of fit in right here. They're big molecules. Macromolecules, as well as some other things, make up our cell organelles. So we'll be talking about this a lot in Unit 2. Unit 2 is all about cells, so we'll be just sitting right here in our next unit. But the organelles are these mini organs that work together to help the cell function. So life starts right here with the cell. All of these things below this are smaller and are not considered living in and of themselves, but an individual cell is alive. Now, if we are in an anatomy class, or if you are in my anatomy class and you've seen all my anatomy lecture videos, we spend all of our time right here. So we're going to not talk much about this year. But cells organize themselves into tissues. Tissues organize themselves into organs, which organize themselves into organ systems, like the skeletal system, muscular, circulatory, respiratory, digestive, that kind of thing. And all of those systems work together to make up the organism. So, first semester, we are really going to be down here. We're going to be talking about the cell. We're going to be talking about biochemical reactions. So again, that's a chemistry term, reactions happening in the cell. But then in the second semester in my course, we're going to be getting much bigger and coming up here, where we're going to be talking about evolution and ecology. So populations are groups of the same species of organisms in the same location. A community would be all the different populations in a given location. The ecosystem would be all the community plus all of the non-living factors of the location. Biomes are ecosystems with the similar traits in different parts of the world, and then all of those make up our biosphere, so the living part of Earth. So environmental science courses, those kind of stick in the spheres, not just the biosphere, but a lot in the biosphere, but also into the other spheres as well. For our course, again, this will kind of be where we spend spring. But for now, we're starting small. I like to teach micro to macro. So we're going to start small and we're going to get bigger. So a review. Hopefully this is all familiar to you. Atoms are made of subatomic particles. So protons, which are abbreviated P positive because they have a positive charge, are located in the nucleus. Neutrons are also in the nucleus. They are abbreviated N0 because they have no charge. They are neutral. And then electrons, which are E negative, they have a negative charge, surround the nucleus in the electron cloud. The majority of the atom's mass is in its nucleus, which is positively charged, but the volume, the space that the atom takes up, is mainly in the negatively charged electron cloud that surrounds it. Like we said, an atom is the simplest or smallest form of an element. So when we're talking about elements, we're really talking about those that are on the periodic table. That's what we're referring to. And there's a lot of things we can know about an element just from looking at the periodic table. So usually the table will show the element symbol, what we use to abbreviate it. An H, a capital H for hydrogen, a capital Z and a lowercase n for zinc, that kind of thing. It also has the atomic number. The atomic number is unique to the element. So any element that has the number or atom that has an atomic number of 1 is hydrogen. 2 is helium. Okay, so that is what identifies the element. It's representative of the number of protons. So if a hydrogen atom somehow gained another proton, it would not be hydrogen anymore. It would be helium. Also, if an atom has an overall neutral charge, that means that the number of electrons, the negatives, balance out with the number of protons or positives. So in a neutral atom of hydrogen, there's 1 proton, and then there would also be 1 electron to balance it out. The other number that's on the periodic table is the average atomic mass, and it's usually going to be shown in a decimal form. So basically, it's an average of the mass numbers of all the isotopes of an element. So the mass number is the sum of the protons and neutrons in the nucleus of the atom. And isotopes are 2 or more forms of the same element. So they would have the same number of protons, but different numbers of neutrons. And so we would average those all out and how often they occur in the environment. And that's what gives us our average atomic mass. So it's representing the most common isotope or form of that element. And we can write out the isotope notation in nuclear notation or hyphen form, hyphen notation. So the hyphen would have the name, and then the mass number. Or you can also do the nuclear notation, which is the symbol and then the mass number as a superscript. So if you don't remember this, this is like supersonic speed we're going through this, but hopefully these examples kind of refresh your memory. So for instance, let's look at this picture. There's 1 proton here, no neutrons in the nucleus. 1 proton means it's hydrogen because the number of protons is the atomic number. It identifies the atom. All right, if it's a neutral element, that means there's also 1 electron. Now, there's no neutrons in here, so this isotope would be called hydrogen-1, or for the nuclear notation, H superscript 1. And that's the mass number, which is the number of protons and neutrons. 1 proton plus 0 neutrons is where we get that 1 right there. All right, this example would be hydrogen-2 or H2. Superscript, that's important, not a subscript. So there's 1 proton and 1 neutron, and that's where we get that 2 from. Still only 1 electron to balance out with the 1 proton to make the overall charge of 0. This one is 1, 2, 3. That would be its mass number. 1 proton, 2 neutrons. Now, notice the average atomic mass here on the periodic table is 1.0079. That would round down to 1. So the most common isotope or version of hydrogen atoms that exist is hydrogen-1. This is the most common version. Okay, so pause and practice. These are some questions. I want you to use the periodic table. Please refer to a periodic table and try to answer these questions, and then we're going to talk through and go over them as a class. Okay, bonding. So the electron cloud of the atom is divided into different energy levels, or they can be referred to as shells. The innermost levels, that level that's closest to the nucleus, as you can see here, holds maximum of 2 electrons. We always fill from the inside out. So if you'll notice oxygen, there's a second level here, but we filled the inside first. Most of the other levels hold up to 8 electrons. This gets more complicated, and it's something that you'll learn deeper in a chemistry course. Again, I'm just trying to do the briefest review for you. Hopefully you remember that electrons in the outermost energy level are called valence electrons, and they are super important because they determine what's going to happen when these atoms are going to bond to become more stable. So notice lithium has 3 protons. So notice it also has 3 electrons, 1, 2, 3. Its mass number would be 7 because 3 plus 4 is 7. And then notice it only has one valence electron. Oxygen has 8 and 8, so its mass number would be 16. If it has 8 protons, it has 8 electrons in its neutral form. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then aluminum, you can look here too. Notice that it has more electrons and thus it has more energy levels. So we can always determine the valence electrons and the energy levels by looking at the periodic table. So group number on the periodic table tells us how many valence electrons an atom has. The groups are the columns. So everything in group 1 has 1 valence electron. So look at lithium. Everything in group 1 has 1 valence electron. Everything in group 2 has 2. We skip the transition metals because they are a little bit different. Group 13 has 3, group 14 has 4, 15 has 5, 16 6, 17 7, and 18 8. The period number tells us how many energy levels. So that's the rows. So everything in period 1, hydrogen and helium, they only have 1 energy level. Row 2 has 2 energy levels. So if we go back here, notice oxygen and lithium have 2 energy levels, and they're both in period 2. There's lithium and there's oxygen. So this matters because all atoms desire to be stable. And stable means they have full outer energy levels, or all energy levels are full of electrons. So if we look back at that lithium picture, lithium has 3 protons and thus 3 electrons. That inner shell holds 2, that leaves 1 electron for the outer energy level. In order for it to be stable, I'll correct this, it needs to lose that 1 electron, or it needs to gain 7 electrons to get up to having 8. Okay, it needs to lose this one, or gain 7. Well, what do you think is going to be easier? It's going to be easier just to lose that 1. Look at oxygen. To get 8, it needs to either lose 6 or add 2. It's probably going to add 2. And then aluminum has 3, so it either needs to lose these 3 or gain 5. So it's going to be easier for it to lose 3. They become stable by forming chemical bonds, and that creates compounds. So a compound is just 2 or more atoms bonding together. So sodium chloride, that's table salt, is 1 atom of the element sodium bonded to 1 atom of the element chlorine. H2O, water, that's 2 atoms of the element hydrogen bonded to 1 atom of the element oxygen. A molecule is 2 or more atoms that are specifically covalently bonded together, meaning they share electrons. And the examples are carbon dioxide. Oxygen, like what you're breathing in around you, is O2. It's not just an O. And then water. All molecules are compounds, but not all compounds are molecules. There are many types of bonds, and we could go into a ton of detail, but I'm only going to review the two very basic ones for the sake of time. Covalent are nonmetals, share electrons. Ionics are when ionic compounds are formed from ionic bonds where electrons are transferred. So the metallic atom, the metal, gives its electrons to the nonmetal. When this happens, the metal loses an electron, and so it becomes more positively charged because it's gotten rid of some negativity. So if a sodium atom loses an electron, it becomes a positive ion or a cation. An anion forms when an atom gains an electron and it becomes more negatively charged. So chlorine in sodium chloride gains that electron from sodium, meaning it becomes more negative. So it would be an anion. Okay, this is something we're going to practice in class. I'm just going to go over one example, and then I want you to try to fill it in yourself. So we have to use a periodic table to do this. So first, if I'm talking about just an atom of nitrogen, I'm not talking about an isotope with a funky number of neutrons or an ion that has a charge, just the atom, then the chemical symbol for nitrogen is just what's on the periodic table, which is N. If it's just an atom, that means its overall electrical charge will just be 0, it's neutral. To find its atomic number, I need to look at the periodic table, and its atomic number, it's number 7. To find its atomic mass, or its mass number, I have to add up the protons and neutrons. We're going to be looking at the most common versions for all of these, unless it's an isotope like it says down there, or a different variation. But the atomic mass on the periodic table is 14.007. So that rounds down to 14 is the most common mass number for an atom of nitrogen. So if the atomic number is 7, that means the number of protons is 7. To figure out the number of neutrons, we'll do the mass number 14 minus 7 of protons. That gives us 7. And then since the overall electric charge is 0, that means the number of electrons needs to be 7 to balance out with the 7 protons. So I want you to try to fill in the rest. I'm not going to show you the answers, and we're going to talk about this in class. So all of that background is because I need to talk to you about water, because water is so important, and it's going to come up a lot this year. And water is a molecule. It's 2 atoms of hydrogen covalently bonded to 1 atom of oxygen, so they're sharing electrons, and it is critical for all life's processes. It has a bunch of special properties we're going to talk about, and a lot of those special properties are due to the fact that water is polar. So we need to know the difference between polar and non-polar molecules. This is going to come up so much this year, so you need to commit these 2 terms to memory. First, a polar molecule has an unequal distribution of charges. What that means is even if the overall charge is 0, one side is a little bit more positive and another is a little bit more negative. So when we look at water right here, the oxygen is partially negative and the hydrogens are partially positive. So it makes the molecule polar. Like molecules, like molecules. Okay, so since water is polar, other polar things are going to like it, and so they tend to dissolve in each other. The positive and negative charges are attracted and they disassociate. So an example of a polar molecule is water. Non-polar molecules do not have a separation of charge like we see in carbon dioxide. So there's no positive or negative poles that get formed. And thus, since it's not alike, a non-polar is different from polar, it does not dissolve in water, typically. So we're talking about carbon dioxide, oxygen, and lipids are examples of that. Okay, so how does water interact with each other water molecules? Polar water molecules can be attracted to each other because of those positive and negative partial charges. The partially positive hydrogen in one molecule of water is attracted to the negative oxygen in the other molecule of water. And this creates a hydrogen bond. It's a super weak bond, but it's really important. And it does a lot of things in biology. So remember, the stronger covalent bond, that's what's holding the whole water molecule together internally. It's holding the H's to the O's. But weaker hydrogen bonds, as you can see here, can exist between different water molecules externally. So the hydrogen of one bonding with the oxygen of another. And this is going to play a role in the characteristics of water that we're about to talk about. So there's some really cool things about water, but we're going to talk about these 5, and then we'll wrap up for today. First is cohesion. Co means together. It will serve you well this year if you keep up with these prefixes, because it'll help you remember the definitions of other words down the road. So co means together, which means it's an attraction between molecules of the same substance want to stick together. So water just sticking to other water. So water droplets sticking on top of other water droplets. Another way to put it is it's the tendency of molecules of the same kind to stick together. And what this creates is something called a high surface tension. Surface tension is just a measure of how difficult it is to stretch or break the surface of a liquid and its ability to resist an external force. And this is important, we're going to see in a couple ways, and we'll look at a visual of this in class together. Another property of water is adhesion, which we also see in this picture as well. It's a type of attraction that happens between 2 different molecules. So like water and glass, or water and soil, or like we saw in the last picture, water and the cobweb or the spider web. And we can see it here as the water is pulled up the paper towel from one cup into another because it's attracted to the other material and the other molecules. This is a stronger bond than cohesion, and it does some pretty cool things. One you've probably seen before is the meniscus that forms in a graduated cylinder as the water molecules adhere to the sides of the glass or the plastic. But the thing that I find the most fascinating is capillary action, which is what happens in plants and trees. And you can see it in a straw too. But we'll mention this in our plant mini unit we'll do in my class at the end of the year. but how plants use their roots to soak up water, and then the xylem uses capillary action to pull it up all the way to the tip top of the tallest trees, which is pretty cool. That's all because of adhesion. This is my favorite one because I live on the coast, so this makes my life better. It's the fact that water has a high specific heat. So it basically means that it takes a lot of energy to change the temperature of water compared to other things. And because of that, the temperature of water doesn't change very easily because of the amount of energy it takes. This helps regulate cell temperatures in organisms because the temperature of water does not fluctuate very much. So that helps aquatic creatures that are living in the water, but it also helps terrestrial creatures and living things because it buffers large fluctuations just in Earth's temperature and in our climates, keeping them moderate because so much of Earth is water. This is that phenomenon where if you live at the coast like I do, in March where I live, it starts being 70 to 80 degrees, but the water is still so cold from the winter. It takes a good bit of time for the water temperature to warm up. So it really isn't until June, we've had about 3 months of 70 to 80 degree temperatures, that the water temperature has changed. So you'll go to the beach in March and it'll feel so warm in the sand, but there will be this cold like breeze coming off of that cold water. Whereas the benefit of it is that in October, November, when it's in the 60s, where I live, there's this warm breeze coming off the water because it takes so long for the warmer ocean to cool off again for the winter months. So that makes going to the beach in October so much fun. All right, another you never not love a picture of a penguin, am I right? Another great characteristic of water is that it's less dense as a solid. So solid water, which is ice, is less dense than liquid water, and thus it floats on liquid water, which makes it possible for life to exist underneath it. And last but absolutely not least is that water is a terrific solvent. So what is a solvent? Well, to understand what a solvent is, you need to know what a solution is. So think of a solution like lemonade. It's just a uniform mixture. It's a homogeneous mixture of two or more substances. So basically, a solute's what gets dissolved, like a lemonade powder, and a solvent is what does the dissolving, like water. So water is really good at doing the dissolving. It's because of water's polarity that it's so good at this, and it's actually considered a universal solvent, or the universal solvent, because it dissolves more substances than any other liquid. And this is so important because so much of the cell is water, and so much of our existence as an organism is water. And so a lot of really important things are able to happen in our bodies because water is a universal solvent. All right. Related to this, I want to define two more terms that are going to come up all year long, so we want to commit them to memory. And like I told you about co meaning together, I want to break down this word so that it'll help you in the future. Hydro is a prefix that represents water. Philia is a suffix that means affinity for. And then phobia is afraid of. So hydrophilic means water affinity, or water loving, if you will. A hydrophilic substance loves water. Usually that means it'll then also dissolve easily in water, like salt and sugar. Typically, hydrophilic substances are polar, but that doesn't always necessarily have to be the case. Hydrophobic means water afraid. It does not have an affinity of water. It's water fearing. It just does not dissolve well in water, like we can see with oil, how they do not mix. And this is going to come up a lot, so please, please, please remember these terms as we move forward. And now in class, we're going to do something fun. We're going to see one of these water properties and why it actually is cool, because I know I've been telling you they're cool, but you might be thinking it's just really boring. We're going to practice some graphing, and we're going to look at one of these water properties in real life.